Hello, hello. This is Brooke Devard, and you're listening to the Naked Beauty Podcast. Today, I am joined by my good friend, Erica Chidi, to talk all things postpartum. She has deep experience in this work. If you all listen to Naked Beauty, you've heard her on the show before. She is just a wealth of knowledge and information. And this topic is one that, of course, is very close to me, given that I'm, recently postpartum. Jade is 5 months old now. We are still breastfeeding. Now she's teething. We're figuring out her sleep schedule. I've traveled, I've pumped, I've done a lot in these past 5 months. It's been joyous, but it hasn't always been easy. And there's something that I would love to share with you all about my postpartum period that, I haven't shared it on social media. I think it's one of those things that I feel very close to you all as listeners, and I can share with you. But something really scary happened to me when I delivered. I didn't know it was scary at the time, but I delivered. My delivery was fairly quick, actually. I wasn't pushing for a long time. I think we counted like 10 pushes in 15 minutes. Jade was out. But then getting the placenta out, my doctor, who I love my doctor. She's such a great doctor, very empathetic, very caring. She was down there for a long time. And I was sort of like, what is going on? And she was saying the placenta, it's a little sticky. It's not, moving out as easily as, they anticipated. Everything's great. I have my baby. Now, when you come home from the hospital, you are in diapers. You are using ice pads on your vagina because it is literally sore. And you're bleeding a lot. You're bleeding a lot in the days after your birth. I continued bleeding up until 6 weeks. Normally, you're not bleeding for that long after you deliver. This was also my second baby. So I could remember, just what my bleeding patterns were like with the first. I called my doctor's office. I said, I'm still bleeding. I'm concerned. They said, oh, you could have gotten your period already, which does happen to some women, even if they're breastfeeding. But I said, no, it's not my period. Something just feels off. Something just doesn't feel right. So what I did was I requested at my 6-week appointment, I wanted to get an ultrasound. And they said, that's not really common to do at your 6-week appointment. But I said, okay, I just want it. I feel like there's something off. I feel like I could still have retained placenta. It's very rare that this happens, but it does happen to people. Sure enough, when I did the ultrasound, there it was. I had retained placenta that was not removed fully during my labor and delivery. So that's very dangerous. Your whole body can go into shock. You can get very sick. You can die from having retained placenta. It's a very serious thing if it's not caught. I'm so grateful that I listened to my body, that I advocated for myself, that I requested to do the ultrasound, that I just knew, okay, something's not adding up here. And all of this happened during the LA fires. The day that I did the ultrasound, it was 2 days before the fire started, and then I had to basically do this emergency removal of the placenta. It's called a D&C. You basically go under, full anesthesia, you're not awake, and then they go in and they kind of scrape out or remove the retained placenta. I found out I had this 2 days before the fire started. Then I had, of course, obviously I'm like freaking out. I want it out of me. The fires begin, we evacuate, we have to, take all of our belongings. We're down in Palm Desert. I then have to come back to LA while the fires are still happening to get this emergency surgery so I can get the placenta out of me. It was a lot. It was very stressful. I was worried about my milk supply. In addition to the fires going on, all of the power in our house was out. So all of my milk that was in the fridge was gone. It was a lot to go through in a very small period of time, but I got through it. And I think that for people listening to this that are pregnant or newly in the postpartum period, there are ups and downs, there are highs and lows. There is that beautiful feeling of carrying your baby, but there are also things that can go very, very wrong, things that you have no control over. And I think we feel more empowered the more that we know, and that is what the spirit of this episode is about. Information is power. One thing that Erica shares at the end of this episode is clarity is kindness. It is so important to go into the postpartum period with your eyes wide open. I would also encourage people to listen to this episode, even if you have no plans of having a baby, because there are people around you and people in your community that are going through some of the things that we're talking about. And the more that you're aware that this is what happens, you can be a better support system to other people. And for soon to be moms and new moms, you can be a better support system to yourself when you know more. So I wanted to be vulnerable and share with you all some of the things that I went through in my postpartum period. I'm so grateful to be in good health. I'm so grateful that Jade is in good health. And again, highs and lows. We're going to get into this conversation with Erica Chidi. Thank you so much for listening to the Naked Beauty podcast. Let's get into it. Erica, welcome back to Naked Beauty.
Thank you for having me. Always happy to be here with you.
There is no one I would rather have this postpartum discussion with, because I think, one, postpartum is such a black box before you go through it, and you are so knowledgeable about it. But two, it's a very vulnerable topic. So I'm happy to be talking to a friend about it, because it's not something that's necessarily always easy to open up about. So I feel like I can be vulnerable with you.
Always here for that.
So I think it would be helpful for people that don't know to give a bit about your background and why you know so much about postpartum.
Yeah, so I was a full spectrum doula for about 15 years. I'm retired now, I've been retired for a few years, but full spectrum meant I did births and I also did postpartum. I also did fertility douling, period douling, anything to do with your uterus, your hormones, and making decisions or going through transitions. That was my job, a job I loved very much. And I really love postpartum work, especially in the early part of my career, because I think what most people don't realize about parenthood, and I actually I'm just a whole thing about this on my Substack answering this question, but people don't realize the discipline that's required during the postpartum period. The postpartum period is so about routine, and the routine being driven by your baby for the most part.
Yes.
Unless there was some type of really challenging traumatic birth or baby was in NICU, you really are going to essentially be learning a whole new skill set. And that's even when it's your second baby, because I'm sure, as you know, even though you had your first on a nice flow, they have their routine, he's doing his thing. Second baby, it's like, how do we figure out the counterbalance between what he needs and what new baby needs? If most people learn to go into the postpartum phase, and by the way, postpartum is a physiological phase, nothing to do with postpartum mood disorders, which are depression, anxiety, OCD, psychosis, etc. Postpartum is normal. It's what happens to your baby. It just means postpartum baby, post-birth. So
Yes.
post-birth is normal. And it's
Yes.
to normalize it, because I think a lot of people say I had postpartum and they're referring to some type of mental issue.
Yes. Yes.
But if more people went into the postpartum period, understanding that it's going to require discipline and a lot of minimizing of distraction in order to hyper focus on your baby and yourself and your body, they would be a lot better off. I feel like a lot of people think postpartum is going to be some kind of delight. I'm going to have like an immediate schedule. It's all going to make sense. And it's none of that. It's a constant adaptation process that's so iterative. You're like, this was great for about 3 days. And then it's like, well, guess you got to try something else now. And most people just don't know that. And that's actually what sets people. That's the cliff. That's the cliff for the depression. That's the
Yes.
cliff for the anxiety, is not knowing, it's constant iteration for the first 3 to 6 months. That's
Yes.
the only thing that's constant, is how much it changes.
I love what you said about getting rid of distractions. I, for the first time in basically my entire adult life, deleted social media off of
I
my
remember
phone.
you told me.
Yes, I deleted TikTok, I deleted Instagram because I didn't want those distractions. I wanted to focus on myself and focus on my baby. I didn't want to be doom scrolling. I took those quiet moments at 3 a.m. breastfeeding to check in with myself. It made a huge difference. With my first, I did have PPDA. Is that what it's called? Postpartum, no, anxiety, PPA. Is that
Yeah.
correct? PPA. I had PPA. I didn't have feelings of sadness or not feeling connected to Mavi, but I had this like constant anxiety that I thought something really bad was going to happen. I can remember the stairs in our apartment. Every time I went down the stairs, I felt like I was going to drop him, like he was going to fall. I always had these visions of him falling and getting really hurt. And I always had this like kind of paranoia that something really bad was going to happen to him. And I haven't had that at all with my second. So I think that's also interesting. It can change child to child.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's interesting too, this piece that you're speaking about with the postpartum anxiety, I also want to emphasize a couple different things about that. And I'll be quick because, I love a tangent, but they're always informative, but they are tangents. So I want to just express that, a big part of postpartum anxiety too, in terms of like thinking you might, fall with the baby, that you might hurt the baby in an accidental way, because thoughts of harming the baby in a very directive way or directed way is actually more in the psychosis arena, which we can talk about if we have time. But this feeling, this anxiety of what's going to happen next. I took a lactation educator course many years ago, maybe like 16 years ago now. And one of the things that she said, her name was Virginia, she said, humans, especially in America, are raised in captivity. We don't see each other breastfeed. We don't have high contact with infants.
Mm.
So when you don't have high contact with infants most of your life and you have a baby later in life, you are going to feel nervous that you might drop the baby. You are going to feel like, do I have this? Because you haven't spent hours and hours holding an infant.
Right.
Like for me, I would never think that because I've held hundreds of babies and I don't have children, right? But it's like I've had high exposure. And so it's a really important thing to consider for anyone who has anxiety generally in their life. If you have someone in your life that you're close with that's having a baby, consider being more up close during that time when their baby's under 6 months, when you can be like, you guys take a shower or go get some rest. I'll be with the baby for a couple of hours. That's what it used to be like when we lived in different proximity, right? But that's gone now for the most part, at least in the United States and a lot of the developed world. So it's important for us to see if there's ways to kind of mimic that to help reduce some of that exposure, basically expose ourselves to the situation
Yeah.
to reduce some of that anxiety. That said, if you have had tons of exposure and you still are having those ruminations or that catastrophizing type of thinking, I also want to just express that that's normal for a first baby too. And
Yes.
by second baby, there is a sense of command, a sense of like, I know what I'm doing. And so you can drop into other parts of the experience.
Yes. I want to talk about what happens in the weeks and months after birth, hormonally, physically, and emotionally. I have a few bullet points here that I would love for you to touch on. Let's talk about hair loss and hormones, and then the reality of your body recovering.
Yeah, so hair loss and hormones is really normal. The transition of hormones that are going on in your body are pretty layered, but to simply explain it, so let's talk about during pregnancy. During pregnancy, whether or not you decide to breastfeed or feed with your body goes through a process called lactogenesis stage 1, which means by about 16, 17 weeks of pregnancy, you have enough colostrum in your breast, which is early breast milk,
Yeah.
enough colostrum in your breast to feed your baby, for a few days. Then after the baby's born and the placenta is released. So the baby being born is one major event. But the second really major event that sets off this cascade of hormones is going to be the removal or the delivery or the birth of the placenta. Once the placenta is out, your body knows, okay, I'm no longer pregnant, which is why a full removal of the placenta is important and making sure that no placenta is retained. There's a ton of issues that happen if there's placenta that's retained in the uterus. Once your body knows it's no longer pregnant, it does a couple things. It starts to increase your milk supply. right? Whether or not you're going to feed your baby, it'll start to rise, and then it'll start to even out depending on two things. One, obviously there's genetics, there's DNA, there's how was your birth? Did you get a ton of fluids via IV during the birth? Other components that might delay the increase in milk volume. And I never say, and most modern lactation folks will not say your milk comes in. It's never in, it's already there. It's just increasing in volume. So post placenta being released starts to increase in volume. The second thing that's going to determine that volume increase or volume decrease is how active your baby is at the breast. If your baby's feeding a lot, there's going to be an increase in supply because there's an increase in demand. If
Yes.
you're not feeding a lot, there's not going to be that increase unless you're exclusively pumping, which will also help to create that increase
The milk supply.
in the supply.
There's something I just want to share here about lactation consultants specifically, because I've had two very different experiences. With my first, I had I didn't have enough milk. I tried, I was doing power pumping. I was basically pumping, I don't know, 10 times a day and feeding in between the pumping. I was doing what they call power pumping. I had a hospital grade pump. It consumed my entire life and it was not fun. A lactation consultant that I met with basically told me that, the moment you give a bottle of formula, your milk supply decreases. And
Not true.
not true. Yes, not true. And really wanted me to pump and feed at the expense of my own mental health. I said, this is really, really hard. And there was just no real accounting for my personal feelings. With my second, I had an oversupply. I was traveling. There was a lot going on, but I met with a lactation consultant through Cedars-Sinai. And she was like, as long as your baby's getting some breast milk, they're getting all of the benefits. Adding in formula doesn't take away from the benefits of breast milk. And she just made me feel so empowered and so happy and so just good about the fact that I could do combo feeding for my baby after exclusively breastfeeding for 4 months. I was just like, okay, I have this trip. I'm not going to be able to pump enough. I have to have a good freezer stash. And then she was just like, introduce formula. It's okay. So I just want to tell people, because I think a lot of lactation consultants, and not to give them a bad reputation, because some are wonderful, as I mentioned, a lot of times they want you to produce milk, breastfeed, pump at the expense of your own mental health.
Yeah. And I think that is very much, I would say, an old guard of lactation consultants or educators. I think the new guard, or the guard that's continuing to educate themselves and upskill, understand that the way that we feed our babies is the way that we live. And we feel the same way about birth. We birth the way that we live.
Yeah.
The idea of exclusively breastfeeding is gorgeous, obsessed with it. If it's possible, we are doing it. But what people don't often want to admit, at least in America, is to exclusively breastfeed requires socioeconomic, emotional support. If you have to go back to work at 6 weeks, if you are a single parent, if you don't have a supportive partner who thinks breastfeeding is cool, I can go on, I can pull a lot more of those. It's probably not going to work very well, because what most people that can have babies don't realize, and this is what I would always teach in my classes, which is why they were so popular, is I would tell people breastfeeding at the very beginning, it's like 18 hours of your day. I'm talking, it's all day. It's all day.
All you do.
People are not prepared. It's all day.
Yes.
Not forever, but during the hardest part, the part when you're just like, oh, I don't fucking do this no more.
Right,
That's going to be then. And
right.
so I think what you're expressing makes so much sense to me. And I think we just have to better equip our mothers, our parents, our people for the dexterity, the athleticism that is breastfeeding. That's why I burn so many calories. It's because you're doing it all the time.
All the time.
And so just to kind of tie that part in a bow, I think that if you decide to combo feed, no, it is not going to decrease your supply if you do a couple things. One, skin to skin exposure, just baby on your chest, in between your breasts, baby diaper on you, ideally no bra or very low cut bra, but ideally nothing between you and the baby. That's going to do just as much or almost as much for your milk supply as would the baby actually suckling at the breast. And so what I would always recommend for my moms that were exclusively pumping, chose not to pump because of certain things or couldn't, that I would just say, make sure you're getting tons of skin to skin time. Like right before you pump, plop baby right there. And then pump right afterwards.
Yes, I
So
love that.
there's a way to do both.
To go back to our discussion about the hormone changes and hair loss specifically, I found a stat that said 90% of women experience noticeable hair shedding after giving birth, typically around 3 to 4 months postpartum. And I have a question for you about this because I've been in protective styles. I just did like a braid takedown. I did a full deep conditioning wash day routine, and I didn't notice a lot of shedding. And I was like expecting it to be there. I did some research, and it seems like maybe because I'm still breastfeeding, the shedding hasn't accelerated yet, and that is coming for me when I stop breastfeeding.
So it's a mix of things, right?
Okay.
So I would say at the end of the day, shedding could be similar to something like hot flashes, right? Not everybody's going to experience them. Some people just go through that change and they experience other things, but not that. Hair fall, which I like, which is a more kind of like European term as opposed to hair loss. I like hair
I like
fall.
I like hair fall.
Hair
Let's use
fall is
that.
better. I think actually it's either European or it also might be Indian. It's one of the two. I lived overseas for a big chunk of my life, so I have a lot of other dialects and phrases that just I think feel softer. So hair fall is normal actually. When we get into it being an issue is if we're losing large patches or large chunks of hair. But you're correct in that as long as you continue breastfeeding, you aren't experiencing a massive hormonal shift until you
Mhm.
stop. The
Until I
big
stop.
hormonal shift is placenta's out. Okay, no longer pregnant. Let's increase the milk supply and let's see what baby does until that's over. Then, when it's over, yes, we can see some hair fall start to happen. And I think, in terms of statistically, where we're seeing it happen is I think for the most part, in terms of the term of breastfeeding, how long it lasts, at least here in the United States, is usually around 3 to 4 months of exclusive breastfeeding. So
I
that
see.
might be, mapping out against when you're hearing about most people experiencing that. I will also add to that and say the hair will come back. There's a lot that you can do with that nutritionally. Also diet is a big, like I said, nutritional
Yes.
diets is a big important part. And then also, there's other supplements that you can be taking. But I think another, I would say potentially even more important component to understand about the transition between the hair fall and hormones and breastfeeding is that what most people also aren't prepared for is for how moody and how mood unstable or how unstable your mood becomes or how much more prone you are to anxiety or depression when you stop breastfeeding.
Oh, wow.
It's a really
So
big,
fun, all of this.
yeah, it's like so fun, but it's fun once you know.
Once
And
you know.
again, and that's what we're trying to set up here. It's almost like a friend telling you what you need to know because once you know, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's normal, nothing
Yes.
wrong. But when you shift from having those breast milk producing hormones coursing through your body to having them not, it's a big state change. And so it's very normal to feel anxious or to feel like more rumination or to feel more stressed out, which is why we always recommend, and I would always recommend to stop breastfeeding in a phased approach.
Yes.
Don't
Not
chuck it, be done. No one has to do that. You can just slowly do it. So you and the baby can both have this kind of gentle exit.
One of the things I really credit you for is putting me onto really good supplements. I take my prenatal vitamins even in the postpartum period, and I feel like that's made a really big difference. I want to talk about you mentioned you lived all around the world. I want to talk about different rituals and practices people take part in around the world for postpartum. So I tried belly binding, which was a very unique experience. I'd love to hear kind of what belly binding does for us and how it helps us heal, but also just other treatments that women undergo or people that have had children undergo postpartum.
So I would say, and I think I'm going to truncate my answer mostly because I want to speak to things that I feel people can incorporate into their own experience here as your listeners, in the sense of not necessarily having to pull so directly or appropriate so directly things that exist in other cultures. But what I would say is that the canopy that connects postpartum rituals and practices in other cultures outside of the one that we live in is a hyper focus on rest and a hyper focus on a restful routine and
Yes.
a hyper focus on food, liquids, nutrients, and focus on giving the mother or new parent optimal space to focus only on the baby and their body and
Yes.
anything that's like 15 to 20 feet near that.
Yes,
So
they're often called confinement rituals. So strict rest, meaning no housework, no socializing, minimal movement, warming foods, body care rituals. You're recovering.
yeah, you're recovering. It's basically thinking of birth as, a triathlon. And for a couple weeks, you're going to be protein loading, carbo loading, sleeping a lot, drinking a lot, and maybe doing some gentle movement and exercise that might feel right for you, in that early period. But the exercise too is just holding the baby. Baby's like 10, 12, 13 pounds and, and feeding. And so I think those are the confinement rituals are a thing. Also having more people around to support, not just people that are being paid, but like family members who understand this is the soup, this is the juice, this is the tea, this is the oil,
Mm.
this is the temperature, right, of the room or environment, this is the bath, this is a sitz bath, this is the liquid to drink for constipation. These are, to make that first poop after you have a baby, if you have a baby vaginally, not feel crazy. These are all things that are part of that
Yes.
little chest of things that can be supportive. I will also say, though, too, one thing that a really good friend of mine, Kimberly Johnson, who wrote two amazing books, one's called The Fourth Trimester, and the other is more about just somatic practices and sensory regulation. Amazing person. She also has a fantastic podcast. She reminded me a couple of months ago, maybe it could be a couple of years because time is a construct, but she said to me, it's something to remember about birth is after birth, you, as the birthing person or the mother, you should spend 5 days in bed, 5 days like in the room, 5 days in the house, and then another 5 days just like walking around near the house. So 5, 10, 15, 20. First 20 days, that's how it should be spliced up. Bed, room, house, around the house. And if you just follow that rule, you're going to be a lot better off, because most people are like, by day 7, okay, I just want to go to the store. And you're like, why are you going to the store? Like, there's no need. There's no
Yes.
that if
Well,
someone else can help you.
yes, I agree that that works for some people, but me personally, by 1 week, I was doing like a walk like on my hiking trail because I just had to.
Walk,
I
no,
needed fresh air.
that's fine. Walk is fine. I'm talking about
Yeah,
store,
doing
like
something,
having to
errands.
actually be like, okay, what am I? Yeah, what do I need to go get? Okay, I'm going to go get this. I'm going to go get that. Walk, great, love that
Yeah.
for you. Anything, even like gentle yoga, you could do. Like, I'm happy with things being done, but what I'm trying to shut off, and we now again, there's great language to talk about these things. We're trying to lower your executive functioning. I want
Yes.
you to be making less decisions. I want
Yes.
you to be feeling more into your body. So if you want to go for a walk every day, hell yeah. Like
Yes.
back in the day, like when we were still maybe walking to get water, or like,
Oh, yes. There's a famous story in my family. When my brother was born, my mom and grandmother left the hospital with the baby and they went to Neiman Marcus because there was a sale going on.
you know
So,
what? That is also fine, because not a lot of executive functioning. It's a
yes, that was their joy. That's how the
dopamine.
Devard women roll. And for a great sale, I may do the same thing. I want to go back to two things that you mentioned. The first is around, you said having family around versus people that you pay. And I want to talk about this more because someone DM'd me and she said, I am pregnant right now and we live with my husband's parents and we're cordial, but we don't get along well. And I'm so afraid that they're going to drive me crazy. And I'm so not feeling good about having them around postpartum. A lot of people may not have positive relationships with their family or with their in-laws. How do you mitigate that in this very sensitive period of postpartum?
I think it's going to be a sensitive discussion, especially if you're not a single parent or a choice mom, which is moms who choose to have a baby on their own and go through that process in a singular capacity, at least the decision of it. They usually have great community around them. It's actually a really important part of having a choice mom experience, is that chosen family piece. I really don't believe in having stressful in-laws around in the postpartum period. I'm pretty bullish about that. Like, I don't care. Like they really should not be there because
How do you coach people though? Like even being in the delivery room, some people's parents want to be there and people are like, I love my mom, but I don't want her necessarily in the room. How do you coach people to have those conversations where they don't want to hurt people's feelings?
you see my hand.
Yeah, you're
Like
you're waving no. You're saying absolutely not. Shut it
absolutely not.
down.
Totally down. So a couple things. If you don't want people to be in the room with you at the birth, your family is not so overly involved. I mean, if your mom's coming with you to every appointment, I don't know if this will work. Most parents aren't, so it typically does work. You can let them know that the doctor said that you're not allowed to have anybody else in the room but your partner and your doula. That's what the
Yeah.
policy is, and that's what we need to do. If you don't even need the excuse, I really would recommend being very clear and saying that having a baby is like peeing and pooing. I don't want you in the room as I'm doing that. And if that does not get them to back down, then you might need to host an intervention. But those two things should do it. I think postpartum, if your family is living with you, that's obviously going to be a little bit more challenging. I have seen in my career over the years, if there were in-laws that were living in the house when the baby was born, they would take like a trip or do a little staycation for the first 2 or 3 days. So when you get home, there's nobody. You have those initial precious early days to just be your little unit. And if there needs to be a lactation consultant or postpartum doula or whoever's coming in, you get a couple of days to yourself. I think that tends to be a nice solve if the family is living in the house. If they're not living in the house and they want to come, which most families do, you really don't want them to come for the first 2 weeks. And the reason for that is two things. If you decide to breastfeed, it usually takes about 2 weeks to establish your supply, meaning you don't want someone being like, oh, hey, honey, like, what do you want to do for dinner? Do you want to come with me? Like, no, you just need to be able to listen to your baby, understand when they need to be fed, and know that crying is a late hunger cue. Actually, when your baby's eyes are opening, is actually food. That's actually when you start getting them ready to bring them to your body or to bring that bottle to reduce their anxiety and their stress and to make feeding go smoothly. You can't be that vigilant and that observant if you have like 3 people in the house who are needing your attention, unless they're giving full blown, I was an RN, their nurse, they were a doula,
Right.
and they're in there helping you. I've seen that happen too. But most of the time, it's not that. So you need at least 2 weeks to get breastfeeding or feeding established before people start coming in. And then when they do come in, the parents that we don't like so much, they have errands. They have things to do. They're doing things in the house, whether it's like housework, if they're comfortable with that, or you're like, can you go to the store and get me this? Can you go to the thing and get me that? You really give them tasks to do so they feel involved and they're not just there like salivating over the baby asking to hold it. Because also in those first few months, or not even months, I'm sorry, those first few weeks, the primary person holding the baby should be the person that is feeding the baby or birthed the baby and is feeding the baby.
Yes, yes. I agree with everything you said. I also want to go back to something you said around the first poop after delivering, because that is something that I feel like people aren't really prepared for. So, what's happening in your body that makes that difficult and such a kind of big thing that you have to prepare for?
Well, there's a couple different pieces, right? So let's see. I want to think about this from a couple different ways. So if you have a vaginal birth, whether it's medicated or unmedicated, so epidural or no epidural, and you push a baby out of your vagina, the tissues in that area are stressed, right? Because they've done exactly what they were designed to do. But that's the first time that tissue, that skin has had to stretch and open in the way that it's doing. So if you think about that, any other tissue in your body, when it has that experience, it's going to feel tender, right? Potentially there might be some skin open in that area, like a little, what we call a skid mark or that type of thing. And so when that area is so sensitive, including the rectum is going to be sensitive too, and the anus is going to be sensitive too, because that's also engaged when you're pushing. Like when you're pushing, it's like you're pushing out a tampon, but you're also still engaging like that backside of your body.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes time to poop, you're engaging all of those same muscles again for the most part, which can feel pretty uncomfortable. And there can sometimes be some hesitation
It's
around
scary.
scary. You're like,
Yeah.
do I do that again? And what's going to happen? And so sometimes just the fear of that can make you constipated, like you just are a little scared of going to the bathroom. And then also depending on the medications that were involved in the birth, also depending on what kind of birth you had, it can create constipation. Sometimes you're not getting a ton of fluid during labor, especially if you're having an unmedicated birth. That can also create constipation. And sometimes, there becomes a little bit of a prioritization in birth, right? In terms of like what's happening in the body, the focus is on moving the baby out of the body, right? So things like, peeing or, pooping kind of get delayed even during pushing. Yes, there sometimes is some poop that happens then because that's unavoidable, but it's not going to be like a clear bowel movement. So eventually, shortly after birth, that poop is going to need to happen, and it just needs to be made comfortable. If you have a cesarean birth, even more so, because all of the medications and everything that you have to take in order to have a cesarean birth are constipating. They typically will give you what they call Colace, which is a type of laxative when you leave the hospital, but I don't feel like it's sufficient. I'm a really big fan of making sure that you're taking like at least 400 to 600 milligrams of magnesium, like really get good mag in there, capsule ideally. If you're not a capsule girly, you can do, one of the natural calm or, magnesium
Yes.
from moon juice, whatever, but you just want to make sure you're getting a high dosage and do that for the first couple of days. That should avoid constipation. Like your first drink after birth should be magnesium loaded so that you
Yes.
continue to have that easement and that ease of making a poop. That said, if you don't do that, make sure that how graphic can I be here? Like, because this is
This is the things that we need to talk about because people don't discuss it. So be as graphic as you need to be.
okay. So two things. One, if you've missed this memo and you're like, fuck, I'm constipated. So make sure you have some Aquaphor. Big fan of just like taking a big gob of Aquaphor on your hand, 2 fingers, and literally putting it up your butt. You can put a glove on if you're squeamish, but just put it up there. You probably won't be super squeamish because you're seeing a lot of butt, seeing a lot of poop coming out of a small person. So you might have more grace for yourself. But
Yeah.
it up there to just lubricate that canal a little bit. And also don't be afraid if you're so constipated to just go up and grab them. Like they'll be right there, these little pebbles inside of your butt. You can just pull them down to like just initiate a little bit of that process. And then another thing too is you should take your hands and sit on your hands on the toilet. Use your hands to give you counter pressure into your butt. So counter pressure into your butt. So like basically push your hands into your butt and then push back down on them. That's the counter pressure that your hands are providing. And then kind of sway back and forth.
Yes.
Plus that aquaphor in there, things are happening.
Things are happening.
They're
Yeah.
happening.
I had to do a lot to get to that first bowel movement, and it was not enjoyable either time. And that's the other thing. It's like you forget about things between, my pregnancies were 4 years apart, and I'm like, oh, I forgot about this. You talked about the first thing that you drink, and I just want to share that oftentimes at hospitals they offer you, I think they call it like a postpartum punch. I don't know. It's like crushed ice, Sprite, orange juice, all the juices, all the sugars. Now, one, I had an epidural. Two, I had gestational diabetes, so I was having no sugar, like not even fruit for my pregnancy. I had that. I obviously loved it because it was like so sugary. I threw up maybe 20 minutes later. So I don't know that I'm a huge fan of the hyper sugary crushed ice juice that they offer you after you
It's
deliver.
so tribal, that juice, especially if you birth the cedars. It's like not logic based.
Yeah.
They're just like, mama, you want this because all the ladies have
Yeah.
it. But it's like, no, I had gestational diabetes, so I don't want it. I've had a lot of clients turn that down
Yes.
and then you can just have some coconut water or have your magnesium
Yes.
or have your natural calm or have your little yummy apple juice out the can. Some really good apple juice out the can that the girls that know, it's super yummy. Or your Gia, if you want a little Gia after birth. All of those things are possible. You can bring a cooler with you to the hospital or to the birth center, or you can just have it in your fridge if you're birthing at home. Also, one other thing I want to mention about pooping after birth is hemorrhoids. Some people have hemorrhoids, so pooping.
Yes.
Sorry, hemorrhoids people. I don't want to. I could already see that coming in the comments, being like, "What about hemorrhoids?" We know they're horrible.
Real, real, real. And until your partner has had to apply hemorrhoid cream to your anus, you haven't really connected. You
No,
haven't really
no,
connected.
no. It is lacking if that hasn't happened for you yet.
Yes. So, but that's a great transition into this discussion about sex and postpartum. And, I think you get cleared or you can be cleared for sex 6 weeks postpartum when you go to get your kind of exam. But what I want to mention is you talked about those 18 hours a day where you have a human being, like a tiny human being, but still someone physically on top of you. And what I experienced was this feeling of being very touched out, like very over, just too much physical touch almost, so that by the time my partner went to even cuddle with me at night, I was sort of like, can you please back up? I need some space because I've just, it's too much. I can't accept even your physical touch because of all that I'm doing with my body.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I feel like I was probably one of the first people to talk a lot about being touched out. Like I'd say maybe 6 years ago, maybe no, let's go back 9 years ago, probably, because it was something I would really notice and it was not being really discussed. I think I come from that time where I think a lot of my contemporaries, whether it's Kimberly Johnson or Dr. Alexander Sachs or Hano, all of us were putting our heads together and starting to say we need to talk about the unmentionables. A lot of us are putting our heads together and saying we need to talk about the unmentionables, but we also need to start observing what they are so that we actually can create language around them. And that's a lot of where this concept of being touched out came from. And, again, if we start to measure the labor of breastfeeding, we can start to understand why a new mom might feel touched out because there's so much high contact from the baby in that period of time. And then on top of that, there's the hormonal cascade or hormonal flywheel that's going on with breastfeeding, especially when it's going successfully, is there's a lot of oxytocin moving through your system, which is a big part of the withdrawal, by the way, when breastfeeding stops. Oxytocin is a hormone that does a ton of things in the body. From a really like brass tacks perspective, that oxytocin is helping the ducts in your breast contract, the milk ducts, to then release the milk. Uno. Two, it's also helping your uterus contract, right? To get smaller and come back down.
Yes. And in those early days, you can feel it contracting. Like as you're breastfeeding, you can feel your uterus contracting and it's painful.
Yeah, it can be painful, which is why it's nice to have a little heating pad actually when you're breastfeeding or pumping too. Or you can take your hand and just kind of gently massage your uterus. You can ask your doctor, post, or midwife, even your lactation consultant or doula should be able to show you where your uterus is located currently in the postpartum phase. You can just rub it a little bit to like wake that muscle up so that when you start to feed, it's a little bit more of a supportive, contraction as opposed to a really harsh one. The heat during breastfeeding as well can support that. But going back to the oxytocin is also the same hormone that gets released when you have an orgasm. It's a hormone of connection, right?
Yes.
And I like to say another layer to speak to it. It's a hormone of input, right? It's a lot of things coming in. It's a lot of feeling coming into the body. It's high sensation. And so by the time you put your baby down, if you've chosen to breastfeed, you're like, whoa, like I'm in a whole different like universe over here.
Yeah.
I'm maxed. I'm full. She's not parched. I'm not thirsty for you. I know you might be for me, but I'm not. And so I think there's a big mismatch in need, right? Between partners, whether you're in a hetero, gay, non-normative coupling, there's a mismatch of need and dynamic. And so what's really important, again, I always like to say to partners, pre-having a baby, especially heterodynamics, is that partners need to anticipate a decrease in interest in sex that is not permanent, that is specifically physiologically orientated if you have chosen to breastfeed. As breastfeeding becomes more established, that urge and desire should come back, but there needs to be accommodation for that. And so by that, we're trying to encourage partners to be comfortable with masturbation, or if there isn't an issue with porn in their life, to maybe incorporate that briefly to just offset some of the need. on top of that, we also recommend, non-sexual, non-penetrative sexual contact. So, that can look like a lot of different things depending on what your coupling looks like. And then, when sex does start again, especially if it's penetrative, regardless of whether same sex, hetero, big, big recommendation for women or people that have had a vaginal birth is going to be taking a Tylenol like an hour or two before it's going to happen, so that you get a little bit of pain control in some of the areas that are uncomfortable. You can take a Tylenol if you have something a little bit stronger that feels okay for you, that's cleared by your doctor, that doesn't interfere with the baby and breastfeeding, that's okay too. But I know that doesn't sound super sexy because it's very like orchestrated, but the reality is with a newborn, you're going to know that you're going to do it in an hour or two. You can be like, okay, later, great, go take a test. First,
Yes.
before having a baby, you're like, later, I don't know, maybe it's going to happen right now, but it doesn't really with an infant. And if it does, kudos to you. We love that experience. That is an awesome journey. But for most people, it's kind of like, okay, in a couple hours. And
Yes.
you can do some prep around that. And also having lubricants going to be important, because when you're breastfeeding, your vaginal tissues aren't as hydrated as they typically are. So we want to make sure that that is being supported as well.
Yes. You talked about oxytocin while you are breastfeeding, which is certainly something I experience. Like when I breastfeed, it makes me feel very happy and calm. But some people get depressive thoughts while breastfeeding. I think it's to tell me, you tell me, but is it called dysphoric milk ejection reflex?
Yeah.
DMER?
Called
Um,
Deemer.
DMER. Okay. Could you explain that?
What's really interesting, and I think the best way to explain it is that a lot of women are sensitive to change, like the delta of change. So a lot of people who struggle with PMDD or struggle with PMS are not struggling with their period, right? Necessarily. Sometimes, but typically PMS, PMDD people, once the period comes, it's like, oh, thank God. It's like nirvana, right? You just go back to it. So what they're struggling with is what happens when the hormones drop after ovulation and start to build and rebuild. A different kind of hormone starts to build and populate after that. But then when the period comes, you're fine. Now with breastfeeding, it's kind of a similar thing. There's a big shift that happens right before the milk gets released, right? So baby's going suck, 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 suck. The body's going, okay, get ready, release, get ready, release, get ready, release, release. And then that exchange, that release is like so it's like that feeling is that state change or that delta of change between I wasn't breastfeeding and now I'm breastfeeding, and the hormones that come with that can really be too much for a lot of women. Well, really be too much for a certain group of women. And it can create feelings of anxiety, depression, sadness. And so for those moms, there's moms who really tough through Deemer. They're like, fuck, I hate this, but they're like, I'm going to do it because there is a component of breastfeeding that's very pleasurable. I think one of the most complicated, I would say, case types of moms who have Deemer are lots of supply, like Dairy Queen. No, it's all potentially even bordering on oversupply.
Yeah.
Feeding going great. Baby's got a good latch, zero pain, easy, Deemer. That is, I can't even explain how tough that is because everything's going great. Baby's gaining weight, breastfeeding's going well, you've got it. But every time you do it, you're sad.
Yeah.
So when I have worked with women like that, I've done a lot of counseling over the years of just like, okay, how many feedings are we doing in a day? If we can pump, when do we pump? If we can use a bottle, when can we do that? How can we create a really nice hybrid system that means we're only having like 2 episodes of Deemer a day, or 3 is
Yes.
6.
Yes.
So it's all about figuring out like what's going to be that right sized, flow
Yes.
for you during that time.
I want to share 3 products that really helped me in the postpartum period and then get your recommendations for products or tools that people can use. So, one of them, they're called silverettes. They're like these silver nipple covers. They're actually made out of silver. You put them in your bra and you add breast milk to them, like a little squirt of breast milk, and they help to reduce chapped nipples. I did not use them with my first baby, but they're wonderful. Do you recommend these to some people you've worked with?
Love silverettes. Love those for a decade or more. They're great. They're a little sleeper too. People don't really know. So they're
Yes.
Hmm.
It's also just interesting to realize that silver as a material can be so healing to the skin. And as I was using them, I was like thinking, I'm like, should there be like silver face masks? Like, I feel like there needs to be more
Yeah.
exploration in how we can use silver to heal the skin.
Yeah, we should talk more about that when we get into skin stuff at a later
Yes.
date, because I'm a big fan of colloidal silver and a big fan of a couple of silver products that are super helpful.
Yes. The other product that I just could not live without would be my Haka. And I feel like I got so much milk supply in those early weeks just by putting that kind of suctioned Haka on the other breast that I wasn't feeding out of. I got just, yeah, so much milk supply that way. And it was like really a game changer for me. And then the third, and I know you have a great water bottle recommendation. So I'm dying for you to get into this water bottle you recommend. But I would say like a Stanley cup, no matter how you're taking in your water in that postpartum period, you need to drink so much water. Even people that feel like they're really good about drinking water, like nothing really can prepare you for how much water your body needs. I also tasked my partner with like, that was one of his many jobs, but I was like, keep my water bottle full. Like every time you come into the room, I need you to check it. I need you to come. I need to have water at all times. So I think having a really good water bottle that you enjoy drinking out of that has a straw is essential in that postpartum period.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of this water bottle and what you're saying, yes, please make your partner your water person. That is a great task for them to do because it's very hard to constantly fill your own cup or bottle while you're feeding a baby generally. I love my bottle. It's a Brewmate Era. I did a whole Substack post
Substack about it. Yes, yes. And wait, tell us what the brand is because I know people are going to want to order it that are
the Brewmate Era, ERA.
okay.
Comes in a 30 ounce and 40 ounce. I love it for so many different reasons, but the interior is all stainless steel. It's the first integrated stainless steel straw. And from a sensory perspective, it's just like the best uh, drinking experience. It's just a very soothing uh, water bottle. And it comes in a lot of gorgeous colors and it's like powder coated. There's like minimal plastic exposure, which is a big piece for me. And then I think another thing that it would be important to have is a really good baby carrier. I would say
Mm.
whether it's a SSC, so a soft structured carrier like an Ergo, or I'm trying to think of another brand, but
I
Ergo's.
have a baby Bjorn one
I was
that's
about to say Baby
soft.
Bjorn. Yeah, and so soft structured carriers are helpful because you can hold your baby on you while you pee. You don't think that makes sense until you have a baby. You're like, oh, I gotta pee. Like, where are you gonna go? So if you have a carrier, you can still pee and have your baby on you, which is ideal in those first few weeks. And the same thing for partners, like they can work and have the baby on them, super helpful. You can also use a sling, or you can also use, a wrap, but just have a baby carrier when you leave the hospital, just like you have a
Yes,
car seat.
yes.
The
When
same,
when I was
same
when I
thing.
was in the baby carrier point is so good. When I was in Zambia, I saw all of these women carrying their babies with like this just a piece of fabric and carrying on their back and their hip. And one of the women showed me even how to tie it and put my baby in, but I just didn't feel comfortable. I don't know how. It's like a
Yeah,
cultural thing. They just have been doing it for generations, so they just know how to do it.
it's totally cultural, and it's like I feel super comfortable with that. I'm Nigerian. I grew up seeing that. I did that with babies. It's like a whole thing. But I agree. Some sort of baby carrier is really important. And then the last thing I would say too is to make sure that you do have some type of binder. I know you mentioned it for a moment, but the binder isn't about like, waist training. It's really about helping your organs come back into their natural setting. And a lot of women experience diastasis recti, which is when the abs slightly separate. Some people have a little bit after pregnancy, some people have a ton. And what exacerbates diastasis is lack of support. So having that support abdominally is so critical postpartum to help with your posture, to help with, neck pain, chest pain, all of those things. Keeping that core supported is really key.
Do you have one that you recommend?
I really like Bodilies. I think theirs is really great. And I think Belly Bandit makes a great one too. Those would be the ones off the top of my head.
This has been such a comprehensive and great deep dive into postpartum because you've spent so many years working with mothers. You also see partners. And one of the things I'd love to ask you are what are ways that partners can show up to be supportive? And what are mistakes that you've seen partners make so that we can prepare people listening to know that your partner may make some of these mistakes, but how can you correct them?
I think I've mentioned a lot of it through this episode, talking about sex. We both got on board with the water bottle piece. I think the last two things I would add to that is make a plan of what your partner can do before the baby comes. My book, Nurture, has a good guidelines for that. First 40 days has a good guidelines for that. So does fourth trimester. My girls' books. Go in there and pull together a postpartum plan so that you can have less questions that you have to field. Ideally, your partner should be able to self-start, figure it out, and have a plan. They know what to cook, they know what to buy, they know who to call. It should not be something that you're doing like in real time, because that's going to create a lot of frustration when you're postpartum and breastfeeding, or just postpartum generally. There's a lot of neurological changes that are still taking place. We would always say with new moms, eyes open, ears closed. It's like you're looking around, but you're like, what am I don't know what you're saying. Like, so you need to really figure out what the plan is. When's the first doctor's appointment? Who's driving us there? All of those things should be decided before the baby comes. So have a postpartum plan beforehand. And I think decide on whether or not you want a doula. I always like to say, task the partner in making sure that happens, setting up the interviews, coordinating with the doula so that you're not having to do that. Those are great things that partners can pick up to be supportive. So have that postpartum plan, have right-size expectations around sex, have right-size expectations around what the new mom or person who had the baby is going to be able to do, and have a plan about what those first couple of weeks are going to look like, given if they go the way that's planned. As we've already mentioned, there's NICU, there can be birth challenges, all of these different things. But if everything goes smoothly, there should be a lot less talking and a lot more doing on the partner side.
Yes. So great as always. I feel like you need to have a doctor in front of you. I just want to call you Dr. Erica. Like get your PhD already. You're basically already there.
Doctor. I grew up with doctors. My best friends are doctors.
Doctor.
It's giving that, but it's also just like it's giving systems. It's giving containment, and that's always really been my thing. And I feel like that's what's also been super fun about my Substack with Soft Boundaries. It's like I get to kind of share a lot of the systems and frameworks.
Yes.
Because I'm like very intense, as anyone who's listening to this can hear, but I'm also a lot of fun. And that's because I am intense. Like I have systems so that I can have a little bit more fun and things can feel a little bit more open and fluid. I feel like, I think this is a Brene Brown quote, could be wrong, but clarity is kindness, right? And so when you have clarity, you have room to be kind, you have room to find whatever bits of joy are around. But when you don't have that clarity, you're so stuck in trying to figure out what to do next that you can't really enjoy yourself.
Yes. Everyone listening should subscribe to Erica's Substack. I will link to it in the comments. I see my producer in BA just wrote, she said that was so good. She's not even anywhere near pregnant. So I think this is a conversation that a lot of people need. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Wasn't that just amazing? I adore Erica. She is truly an expert. She will be back on the podcast. We're going to get into all things skincare and what to eat to nourish your skin. She has a wealth of information across various topics, but talking to her about postpartum was just so high on my list because, as you heard, she is so knowledgeable. All of those products we mentioned will be linked to in the show notes. Definitely check out her Substack. She has a wonderful book that I think all pregnant people should read called Nurture. And if you listened to this episode and you found it helpful, please share it with someone in your community who could benefit from the knowledge. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back next week with a new episode. Amen.